Hi, let's talk about Chapter 4, Markets and Competition. Before we begin, you're going to need a couple of definitions. A market is a group of buyers and sellers together. It doesn't have to be in a single location. It's just a bunch of people who are willing to make an exchange. And then this assumption we're going to make about a competitive market, please understand this right here. Many buyers and sellers, and each has a negligible effect on the price. Okay, in this special kind of marketplace, it's not like a monopoly market where a monopolist can set the price. It is just they take the price as given, is set in the marketplace. Okay, in a perfectly competitive market, this is a special type of market. Please memorize both of these. All goods are exactly the same, and buyers and sellers are so numerous, we can even think that there's an infinite number of buyers and sellers. So we're going to use those definitions for the rest of this chapter. All right, let's talk about demand, and then we'll go ahead and talk about supply, and we'll put them together in the market. Quantity demanded. This is the number of goods that somebody wants, and this quantity demanded relies on the law of demand, and that's very simple. If something gets more expensive, you want less of it. So really we can write that in the law of demand is when P goes up, that means that the quantity that I want to demand goes down. All right, pretty simple. Demand schedule. So here's the demand schedule for the quantity of lattes that this one person wants. As you see, it obeys the law of demand. If they're free, then we want a lot of lattes, and as the price goes up, you see the number of lattes demanded goes down. These individual numbers here are the quantity demanded, okay? She demands 8 lattes at $4. She demands 12 lattes at $2. Okay, this is not, I want you to make a difference between the words quantity demanded and demand. Quantity demanded are just these individual numbers. Demand is this whole entire, think of it as an Excel spreadsheet. All right, that's quantity demanded versus demand. All right, so here's the graph, and we can go ahead and graph the demand curve according to her demand schedule. This is very simple. At this point, it's free, so I go ahead and put $0. Okay, that's why we're at $0, and she's going to want 16, so I have this point right here. And then the next point, if I raise it to $1, she wants fewer. If I raise it to $2, she wants still fewer. If I raise it to $3, and subsequently I can raise it for all of them, and I have these the full demand curve. I connect it, and that's what we call a demand curve. Now, so demand can be represented in either of the two ways. Demand can always be represented by this, the demand schedule, or this, the demand curve. It tells you the exact same information. It's just two ways of describing the same thing. If I give you a demand curve, you should be able to give me this. If I give you the schedule, you should be able to go ahead and give me the curve. All right, so market demand is how much everybody demands. We just looked at an individual's demand schedule, Helen, right here. I'll go ahead and reproduce it. But let's suppose there's someone else named Ken, and he has this sort of demand, and the quantity total demanded is just the horizontal summation of all of those goods. This is pretty self-explanatory. All right, so I went ahead and took the market demand and I graphed it in much the same way that I graphed Helen's individual demand earlier. So this is the market demand, and this tells me that in the whole market, this is a very simple market, there's only 2 people in it, $6 a pop, people are only going to want 6 lattes. All right, and that's every possible person who would buy lattes. So let's talk about what shifts the demand curve. Because remember, price does not shift a demand curve. Price is just a movement along the demand curve. The actual demand curve itself will shift for any other intrusion that is not price. Okay, so it's very important. Demand curve shifters are non-price. Let's make sure that you have that clear. All right, so if more buyers come, imagine the market demand that I drew a couple slides ago. If there's more people, they're going to want to have more goods. And look at this. At every point, let's say there's a third person. At every price point, more people are going to want to buy that. And when I draw the new curve, the curve shifts out to the right. Similarly, if the market lost buyers and buyers left, the demand curve would shift to the left. All right, income. Think about this. If you, or for a normal good, if you get more income, you're going to want more of that good. So therefore, it will shift the demand curve to the right just the same way that the increase in the number of buyers shifted it to the right. That was the last slide. A little caveat, if you have an inferior good, this is just a special type of good where if you get more income, you buy less of it. Something like top ramen. Poor college students buy top ramen. As you get more income, you stop buying top ramen. So it's a special kind of good. There's not very many of them out there. Most goods are normal goods. All right, so prices of related goods. I want you to think about the way goods can relate. They can be substitutes or they can be complements. Pizza and hamburgers are substitutes. If the price of pizza goes up, that's going to make more people want to demand hamburgers. That's going to make the hamburgers demand curve shift to the right. Okay? Coke and Pepsi, those are substitutes. Laptops and desktop computers, those are substitutes. CDs and music downloads, also substitutes. All right? But complements means that you consume both of these goods together. So computers and software, or iPhones and apps. If a computer gets more expensive, you buy fewer computers, and therefore you buy less software. So this actually makes the demand curve shift to the opposite direction. So you really have to think if the good is a complement or a substitute. All right, here's some other examples. Tastes, we also call this desires or preferences. Okay, so anything, including perhaps advertising, if Apple decides to advertise for their iPod a lot, that's going to make the demand curve shift to the right just because people want to buy it a little bit more. Okay? And the final one we're going to talk about is expectations. And here's some examples that you can read over. These are also pretty self-explanatory. Let me give you a quick summary of all the things that influence buyers. This first one right here, okay, price, this is crucial. This does not shift the demand curve, okay? This just causes a movement along the demand curve. So if we just draw a demand curve right here, right, price is on this side. As price goes up or down, I just slide along the demand curve. Perhaps I was located here, then I move up to here, then I move up to here. This changes the quantity demanded, you see, but it does not change demand. If I say changing demand, that means shifting the demand curve. That's known as changing demand. This is anything that's non-price. Price only shifts, only causes a movement along the demand curve. That's known as a change in quantity demanded. This is change in demand. This is change in quantity demanded. Change in demand, change in quantity demanded. This is a very, very common point of confusion for my students. All right, I want you to go ahead and draw a demand curve for each of these and then answer it on your student handout. I have a place for you to draw these in, and when you're done with that, then you can go ahead and click play again. All right, if the price of an iPod falls, here's what's going to happen. They're complements, so if iPods get cheaper, people are going to want to download more music because they're going to have perhaps more iPods now, and it's going to make the demand curve shift up. All right, now let's say the price of a music download falls. Remember, this is not a shift in demand. This is just something sliding along the demand curve because it's price. Anytime price is changing, that does not change the demand curve. You just slide along it, and you come to a new point on it. All right, and finally, C. If CDs get cheaper, well, that's going to make more people buy CDs. So what are they going to want to do? Are they going to want to download more music? No, they'll go ahead and buy CDs instead. So this is going to make the demand curve shift down. All right, that about wraps up demand. Let's talk about supply here, okay? So this is really the exact same sort of ideas except for just the firms creating the goods and not the people buying the goods. So everything is just flipped around, all right? Again, we have quantity supplied, and we have this law of supply. So remember this, and basically the law of supply is the opposite of the law of demand. As price rises, then the amount that people produce of this good rises as well. Firms are trying to maximize their profits, so if they see that they can get more money for a good, they are going to produce more of it. It's pretty simple. we can go ahead and condense all this information onto a supply schedule exactly the same way that we did a demand schedule, except notice the only difference here is that as the price goes up, right, as the price goes up, the quantity of lattes supplied goes up, because we're thinking of that I'm Starbucks right now instead of the person drinking the lattes. All right, I'm the firm that's producing it. And of course, I can go ahead and graph this supply schedule, and I get a supply curve the exact same way. This is 0.00. This is 0.13. Okay, just to make this clear, this number 1 here. Okay, that's the y-axis, so that's why I started at the 1 here. This is a 3, and this is the number on the x-axis, and then I'm starting at 3, and then I end up at this point right here. Okay, and let's go ahead and graph all of these points. Once I graph all of them, I draw a line through it, and that's called my supply curve. Okay, same as demand, the supply in general can be represented by one of two ways: the supply curve or the supply schedule. Given one of these things, you should be able to give me the other. Again, market supply, there's more than one person out there supplying. So if I add up everybody out there who is producing, there's Starbucks supply schedule from before, but let's go ahead and add another fictional place called jitters. And together, the market supply is the horizontal summation at every single price point. Okay. Here's the market supply curve, and if things change, then the supply curve changes as well. Remember, these are non-price determinants. Exactly like the demand thing, we have to remember these are non-price determinants. If price changes, the supply curve doesn't change, it just slides along the supply curve, okay? The only thing that actually changes a supply curve are non-price shifters. So let's take a look at them right now. First is input prices. Input prices are the things that firms use to create their output. Okay, so wages, prices of raw materials. If you have to end up paying your employees more, you're not going to be able to make as much stuff. So if you have a rise in input prices, then you have a fall in quantity supplied. This second bullet point here shows the opposite. If you have a fall in input prices, the supply curve shifts to the right. Okay, so fall in input prices, which in the latte example, you need milk. And so if milk gets cheaper, people can produce, the firms, Starbucks and Jitters, can produce more at every price point, you see, because it's cheaper. Because milk is cheaper, so their good is cheaper, so they can sell more of them. That's going to allow them to increase supply. Notice on this graph, anytime there is an increase, the curve moves this way. That's an increase. This is true for both supply and demand, and that's for an increase. Okay. If there's a decrease in supply or demand, it moves back towards the origin. Okay, that's very handy to remember. Okay, imagine technology. Suppose there's a cost-saving technological improvement that makes supply increase. All right, so the number of sellers also, just as the number of buyers makes the demand curve increase, the number of sellers makes the supply curve increase, and it shifts the S-curve to the right. The final one we'll talk about is expectations. If I think that conditions are going to change in the future, perhaps I will change the amount of supply I'm giving right now. Particularly if they think they're going to get high prices in the future, they'll perhaps hoard some of their good right now. These are the firms, and they won't sell it, and that means supply will go down or shift to the left. All right, so here's a quick summary of all the different things that can change the quantity supply. Again, I want to point out that price does not shift the supply curve. It only causes a movement along the supply curve. These other things actually move the supply curve. All right, let's do an example. I want to know what happens to the supply curve under each of these following scenarios. Okay, go ahead and do them on your paper, and then I will give you the answers. Oh, there's actually one more. All right, do these on your paper, and then unpause it when you're done. Okay, so if retailers cut the price of their software, as we can see, it's just a shift, it's just a movement along the demand curve because we're talking about a change in price. Okay, so it's not a shift in the supply curve, it's just a movement along. All right, if, however, it's cheaper to produce the software, this is not a shift in the price of it. This just means that it's easier for them to make the software. So at every price point, supply shifts to the right. That's known as an increase in supply. And then if professional preparers raise their price, that is a tricky one. I got you. That is going to shift the demand curve, because think about it. This doesn't have nothing to do with the people that are making tax return software. Professional preparers are a substitute for tax return software, so you and me as the consumer, we're going to stop going to professional preparers such as H&R Block, and we're going to start using tax return software such as TurboTax. All right, so let's put them together, and this is actually the funnest part of this chapter. We can put them together and find the actual equilibrium. So when supply equals demand, that is the amount that people are producing equals the amount that people want, then we're in what's called equilibrium. And in this graph, it's right here at 3 and 15. We call it equilibrium because it doesn't move. Nobody has an incentive to produce more or change the price. Okay, so here's the market quantity, that's QD, and the market supply, QS, from the earlier slides. And you just looking at it, you can easily tell that the place that they're at equilibrium is when price is 3. Okay. And the equilibrium quantity is the quantity at 3 is 15. So what happens if somebody sets the price too high? Perhaps for some reason all of the companies, the firms, Starbucks and Jitters, decide to set their price at $5. Quantity demand you see is at 9. That means people only want 9 because they're too expensive, but the firms, Starbucks and Jitters, are trying to make 25 because the firms say, whoa, we can definitely make a lot of profit at this high price. But what happens? There's 16 extra lattes, and as we know, when there's a surplus of goods, the firms try to get rid of it by selling them cheaper, also called going on sale. That's going to press the price down, okay, to $4. There's still a surplus of $4, okay? So it's not quite in equilibrium yet. You see, it helps a little bit. There's less of a surplus because quantity demanded has risen, quantity supply has fallen, but the price needs to keep falling. The price is not quite all the way down until it's at $3. So you see, we call it an equilibria, not because anybody is forcing the price to stay $3, but naturally, if anyone tries to set the price too high, there's going to be extra lattes left over, and they're going to put them on sale or on clearance, and the price will naturally fall on its own till it gets to the right spot. In much the same way, if the price starts out too low, people want a lot of lattes because they're very cheap. Okay, but nobody wants to make lattes. That's the quantity supplied is only 5. So we have what's called a shortage because there are not enough lattes to go around. When something is scarce, then the price goes up because people are all trying to get this good, and so it puts upward pressure on the price. And it helps the shortage a little bit, but not quite. You see, there's still a difference between supply and demand at this point. The price is not finished rising until it gets to $3. At the equilibrium price, it stops. All right, anytime the price is below the equilibrium price, anytime the price is down here, there's upward pressure on the price. Anytime the price is up here, where we saw earlier, there's downward pressure on the price, okay? There's upward pressure on the price in this area all the way until we get to the equilibrium price, and that's why this is known as the equilibrium. All right. So now, of course, that's too easy just looking at the equilibrium. We're going to create stories in which either the supply or the demand curve changes and ask for the changes in equilibrium. All right, so decide whether the event shifts the S curve, the D curve, or both. Decide in which direction the curve shifts, and then draw it on the graph. Please, please, please use the supply and demand curves to answer all these questions and all the questions in your homework and on the tests. Don't try to do this in your head. So look at this right here. Suppose that here's the price and quantity for hybrid cars. There's a demand curve, there's a supply curve, and the original equilibrium is right here. Okay? But let's suppose there's a shift in demand. Okay? The story I'm going to tell you is that there's an increase in the price of gas. Now you have to really think, what curve shifts? If the price increases, the demand curve is going to shift. If gas gets more expensive, people are going to demand more hybrid cars, which is going to shift it to the right. Okay, and that's what this part says. However, you also have to ask yourself, does the supply curve shift? The answer is no, the supply curve does not shift because the producers of hybrid cars don't care about the price of gas. They only care about their costs, okay? So let's look at how this happens. Demand curve shifts, and it shifts to the right as we spoke before. And so let's go ahead and draw it on there. And finally, I find the new equilibrium. So you can see that price increased and quantity increased when I have an increase in supply. All right, I want you to pay attention. When I ask you for how does the equilibrium change, an equilibrium always has a P and a Q. So you need to give me two numbers whenever I ask for an equilibrium. An equilibrium always has a P and a Q. So now you're going to say P2 and Q2 are the new equilibrium. The old equilibrium was P1 and Q1. All right, so here is what I've been talking about all along. I want you to remember, a change in supply means the whole S-curve shifts. A change in quantity supplied just means sliding along the S-curve, okay? Same thing for demand. A change in demand means the whole demand curve or the demand schedule moves, but a change in quantity demanded is just a movement along the demand curve, all right? So these second two are caused by price changing. Remember, price changes do not change curves. All right, so let's shift supply. So if new technology reduces cost of producing hybrid cars, ask yourself, what curve shifts? So clearly the supply curve shifts, but does the demand curve shift? No, the demand curve does not shift if it's just new technology for the producers, for the firms. In which direction does it shift? It shifts right because that's an increase. Remember, on our graph here, anytime there's an increase, either curve will shift to the right. Now finally, let's go ahead and look at the intersection of the new curves, and then you can tell me what happens to the equilibrium. As you can see, the price falls and the quantity increases. Remember, to tell me an equilibrium, you need to tell me two things. You need to tell me a Q and a P, or a P and a Q. You need to tell me these two things always for an equilibrium. All right, now let's shift both of them to make it really difficult. So let's say gas rises and technology reduces production costs. These are just the same two examples from before, so I know that both curves shift. I know both shift to the right because from previously doing this, I know both of them shift to the right, and I have a new equilibrium. But I want you to see that it depends on how I draw it, okay? Let's suppose that this S1 right here, that instead of that S2, I would have drawn S2 way out here. Suppose it moved a lot, and this was S2, okay? That was S2. Then you see right here, this would be my new equilibrium. For sure, quantity increases, but look, price actually went down. This would be P2 right here. So price goes down if supply shifts a lot. This example is just drawn like this in order to show you that price might go up, but it might go down. Okay? So you need to realize that when something for sure will change, in this case, quantity will for sure change, but price, it's called ambiguous. Ambiguous because it might go up or it might go down. All right, so let's go ahead and do these problems, and then this lecture will be over. I want you to use the three-step method to analyze each of these events. Do these on your handout, and when you're done, hit play, and I'll give you the answer. All right, so let's suppose that CDs fall. Well, we know that the demand curve shifts left. We did this earlier. And the new equilibrium tells us that P and Q both fall. So when you tell me a new equilibrium, you have to tell me both a P and a Q, and they're both lower than before. All right, let's suppose there's a fall in the cost of royalties. That is basically how much money you have to pay to singers. So this is, you can think about a supply curve, all right? The people who are selling the music have to pay the singers. So this is making it cheaper to supply music, so that's going to be an increase in supply. Remember, anytime a curve shifts to the right, that's an increase. Okay? And our new equilibrium looks like this. So we see that if there's two things that happen, if CDs fall and the cost of royalties fall, that's going to shift both curves, and the effect on Q is ambiguous, though. Draw it out and see that you can draw it where Q goes up and Q goes down. But any time you draw it, P always goes down. All right. So here is a summary of how prices allocate resources.